have spun up as a single. I took 8 ounces of this wool, which is brown sheep wool, that I have dyed in an acid-based dye into these variegated green shades. I split it into thirds, did 2 bobbins as a single, and now I'm taking an equal amount of this, which is merino and bombec silk blended together, and I am going to card these 2 up together and then spin 2 more bobbins of singles and then ply those bobbins with the bobbins that are already done, which will hopefully produce several skeins of a really lovely spring green yarn. We'll see. So in order to do this, I am going to open up these braids, and I'm actually going to card them on my carding machine, which I will change positions and show you in a little while. So this one is braided up as a braid, which sounds like a really strange sentence, but in order to make this braid, you basically fold it in half. They're like the shape of an E, and then you start braiding with these being your strands. So your E is, let me continue undoing this. So the yarn that has very little sheen to it, which is one of the reasons I'm mixing it with the silk. Okay, so if you're going to do this braid, you lay it out, and here's your E. If I go like this, you can see the E a little bit better. So then you just get it like this, and you'd braid it like you would do an ordinary braid. This one, however, is like crocheted chained together. So it's just pull the loops and it comes out. So if I were putting this one in, I would start by making a loop at the bottom and then just do a series of loops. And this is a really good way, especially nice and loose, to store either roving or top. The green is a roving, the white here in my hand is top. And basically that's talking about the preparation it had before, I don't know what this black thing is, before it got to me. So this is a combed top of merino and bombec silk. These are both commercially prepared as far as the combing and the carding, and this is a carded roving of brown sheep wool from Wyoming. I actually don't know the origin of the merino bombec silk because I bought it from a lady in my spinning guild who was destashing to make a guest room in her house in place of her studio, which I think is how long ago it was that this was on a sheep or encasing a silkworm. But soon it's going to be yarn, and we'll see in a minute. Forgot that one of the reasons I was showing you this and have all this set up was that I was going to show you how I was breaking this to run it through the machine. So we'll just finish pulling this out. Now I'm going to split both of these in fourths just to start out with. And I find the easiest way to do that is not to bother getting out my scale, but is to just do it by length. And I couldn't lay these next to each other to do that because due to their different content and preparations, they're not the same length by any means. They are nearly the same weight. This is 2.7 ounces and this is 2.8 ounces. Okay, so I've just lined everything up to make four rather long strips, and I'm going to pull gently apart so that it breaks where it wants to break, and then do that again. So I now have 4 pieces. I am going to take each of these 4 pieces and break them again. And just basically do the same thing. Lay it out so that I'm getting it even. You might not get exactly by weight a perfect sectioning of this, but when I make bread, I do the exact same thing. I form the dough into a ball and cut it into 4 pieces, and then form those into balls and cut those into 4 or 3 or whatever size I'm looking for to get the same number of rolls or pitas. And I find that that works out really, really well. and is pretty close to accurate, and also significantly easier to do than to spend a lot of time laying it on I forgot, this is a little stiff, laying it on the scale, and then you always end up with one that's really small, and then you have to go back. And so it's just easier to do it this way. And the reason I'm doing fourths is because I'm going to run it through the machine in layers, through my drum carder, and I'm going to put a layer of the green, and then a layer of the white, and then a layer of the green. And I'm probably going to end up with 2 bats off this, although we'll see. I might decide to do more than that just to get it very well blended. I'm looking for a nice blend of the greens and to transfer some of that beautiful shimmer and sheen that the Bombex is adding to the other one. There's even some kind of brownish tones in this here. I'm really happy with the way this spun up, or way this dyed up rather. I had this with me for sale for a while, and it was a nice long braid, and I drape it from the top of my booth's tent at craft shows. Finally, I decided I had looked at it too long and no one else was going to get to play with it. I was going to do it. But I suppose that's a good piece of information for those of you who didn't know. In addition to selling yarn, I sell roving. I dye both naturally and chemically, acid-based dyes, and so I have some of both available in my store. There's a bit of grass there, we don't want that. Because I'm having to open this up, it's a little bit compressed. It doesn't actually affect the spinning because I spend a lot of time attenuating the fibers, but it is just a little bit compressed. So for ease of pulling this off without ripping my shoulders off, I'm just opening it up there. So I have 8 hunks of green and 8 hunks of white, and I'm just gonna, before I start here, I'm gonna lay them out. White, green, white, green, white, green. That's so that when I'm utterly distracted while I'm keeping my fingers from getting stabbed on the drum carder, I don't end up with one bat being significantly more green or white because I grabbed the wrong thing. My table is kind of letting me down here on size. We will squish. We will not add too much of my hair to the spinning project. All right, so I think that we're about set to start the carding process. I have started to work on the bats. I wanted to do at least one of them off camera so that I could see how it was going to work up and decide how I was going to proceed. And one of the things that I needed to do, I found, was actually split this green a little bit further. It, as I was saying, is a little bit compressed, and it just helps it to bite on if I open this up a little bit, which I found easier to do ahead of time rather than to try to do it as I was going. I am splitting this project into 4 bats, and I will show those bats in a few minutes and how I'm going to treat them. But all I'm basically doing here is just opening these green ones a little bit. I split it. I'm splitting them vertically in to 4 sections, just to try to get nice even coverage across my drum carder. And this is one of those things that I want to do while I'm paying attention to where my hands are, rather than getting my hands poked by the drum carder. Because the turning of that crank can sometimes cause your hands to get a little bit poked. Almost everyone I know has at some point caused their fingers to bleed on their drum carders. It's a good, useful tool, but like most tools, you have to be respectful and pay attention to what you're doing. So I just thought that I would show this on camera and let you see what I'm doing here before I move down to showing the next step. I am going to run the bat through the drum carder twice to more evenly distribute the color and blend it. And I really like how it is turning out. So once I get this set up, then I'll be ready to do what is actually the last bat. All right, that is all done and ready. And I'm going to do it green, white, and more even if I top load, which is not really the standard way to do this, but in particular in this project, I really want to do it this way so I get more even coverage across the carder. My machine does pull more in one spot on the large wheel than it does in other spots. And so if I want a nice even bat, I find that top loading it like this is a good way to achieve that. But you can see why I was cautioning about poking your fingers. These aren't actually sharpened, but moving wheels and things that are kind of sharp is not actually sharp. Not a great combination. See, that's why I lay it out ahead of time. I went and tried to grab the white. And I'm just kind of eyeballing it and filling in the bigger gaps as I go along. Now, as I said before, when I get done doing this, this will no longer be top or commercially prepared top or commercially prepared roving. I will have a bat, and I am going to use a method that I was taught in my guild for turning the bat into more of a roving-like consistency. And it is effectively a replication of what the machines at a mill would be doing to the carded fiber, although on a much more human labor intensive kind of scale, and I'll show that technique a little later on in the video. Alright, now back to green. Now I have my machine here set up on a card table, or on a TV tray rather, mostly because all of the tables in my studio are too thick to accept the clamps I have. Doing this not clamped to a table is just, well, it doesn't really work very well. You need 2 hands to run the machine and about 2 hands to hold the machine down if you don't clamp it. I only have the 2, so mechanical advantage it is. Before I bought the clamps, because they're not sold with this machine, I would sometimes call my teenage son in to hold down the machine while I turned it. He grew bored with that rather quickly. I really do like the Brother drum carder that I'm using here. It was a birthday present from my parents. And it does a good job both in carding and in taking up a lot of fiber. You can produce a fairly big bat on this. The only real complaint I have is that it does load a little bit unevenly if you use the feed tray, but that isn't really such a big deal. Especially when in consideration of how economical this particular machine is compared to some of the others on the market today. I really do like its size. It is a little bit awkward to store. It takes up a lot of room. And it's not really something that you can not have flat on a surface. I did have a friend who stored hers sideways, but that didn't really work out for her. Kept bumping into it, and this is not really a good thing to bump into. Alright, and that is the last of the green. Hold on. I don't know what this little black spot is, but we're taking it out. This is just a cat brush. Bought it at the store, pet store. You can use a hand cart for what I'm about to do. I just find it a little bit easier to control the small size of the cat brush. When I first started spinning, I couldn't really jump right in and buy all of the fancy and expensive tools right away. So I went out and I picked myself up these 2 little cat brushes, and I did all of my carding on the cat brushes for a while until I had managed to save up enough to upgrade into the proper tools. They work just fine, they just take a lot longer. So I'm just adding a 3rd layer the teeth here to blend it in and try to make it a little bit more cohesive. I imagine this is much louder and it's probably harder to hear my voice. All right. That looks good. Oh, sorry about hitting the camera there. All right. That was probably a pretty terrible adjustment. So now I'm going to pull this off. I have this awl that my dad made that I find really handy for doing this. I know lots of people use a knitting needle, and some companies make special tools for getting this off. This works really well. You just kind of want to take little bites across. Try to pull it out a little evenly. Come on. Now certainly I could be done right now. All of the fibers are commingled and they are sort of aligned. The difference between combing and carding, of course, is that combing gets it much more aligned. The fibers tend to all be straight. But if you'll notice here, the fibers are pretty darn straight. They're not perfectly straight. Certainly there's going to be some spots where the fibers are intermingled or wobbling around a bit. But they're pretty straight, and I could certainly skip running it through the machine again and just begin spinning. But because I have in fact already done the other three and I did run them through the machine, I have to do this one, or the colorway in my yarn will be slightly different. And that is not what I'm looking for. So you just kind of work it through and pull it out. Mostly it pulls out cleanly, and every once in a while you'll get a spot where some of the fibers lag a little bit, and that's all I'm doing is lifting them up and out. And you just calmly work it. See, it's just like this, where the one fiber is pulling away, and you just pull it back up to join its friends in the bat. A little bit there. And there we go. So this is what I have. It's more white on the outside, on what was the outside. It's more green on what was the inside. What I'm going to do now is strip this vertically in 4 pieces and run it through the machine again. So actually, if I do this over the top of the machine, you'll be able to see exactly what I mean. I did try to shoot this video once before, and after looking at it, I realized that every single time I split a fiber, I did it off camera, which kind of defeats the purpose of trying to show you what I'm doing if I do it not in the shot and just talk about it. There we go. So this time I am going to load from the bottom, and I am keeping my hand on these fibers to slow down how fast they get taken up so that I have some control there and can do it reasonably evenly. So the teeth on the small wheel are catching the fibers as I hold them closer and allow them to leave my hand, and bringing that in onto the big wheel. Now, if I were doing raw locks or something that wasn't commercially prepared, I would not do what I'm about to do, which is clean off the small wheel and feed it back onto the big wheel, because one of the things that this process does is tend to sort out smaller fibers and kind of junky bits that you don't want and leave them on this wheel, this small wheel. It also drops a fair amount of any dirt or vegetable matter down underneath onto the table. That's why this is not really something you want to do over your white living room carpet. I'm just gonna clean this. If I were doing a less well-prepared fleece to start out with, I would probably use whatever came off this bat as stuffing or infelting, depending on how clean it still looked afterwards. Yes, you do save some more fiber by including the small wheeled fibers, but you also are adding shorter fibers back in general and causing yourself more frustration in the long run. So it really is a little bit better just to treat them as separate bats for separate purposes, unless you're running nice commercially prepared, roving through here and blending for the purposes of color match or some other attribute. I let too much get in there. Okay. So now I have a thicker spot right there. Easier to turn the crank without something else in your hand. So I set it all down. All right, next strip. I switched to top loading that little bit because when you're table loading, you run the risk of ending up with your fiber getting caught in your timing in your drive belt here, which is really, really obnoxious. So I tend to shy away from that edge just a little bit. I really wanted some fiber right there. All right. And you'll notice we're getting some really good blending going on now. Now, as I'm working with this, I'm getting fiber all over my face. Sorry, I keep stopping and rubbing it. I keep thinking spring green, which is kind of a not incredibly descriptive word or phrase for it. But it is, of course, greening up in spring all around me. And this is such a light spring green. Now, when I was in high school, I was in a group called Summer Shakespeare Theater, which was an attempt at doing really authentic Shakespearean productions here in Wisconsin with high school students. And really great program, really learned a lot. But one of the things that I learned was that the town of Spring Green, Wisconsin has a Shakespeare festival every year. Put on some lovely performances and was really inspirational to the man who ran our program. And so whenever I think of the phrase spring grain, I think of William Shakespeare, which is why I am naming this colorway Wild of Nothing, which is part of a Shakespeare quote that talks about when you blend things together, you have a wild of nothing. And I'll post the full quote in the show notes. I did spend a little bit of time last night looking for a Shakespeare quote that I thought went with this color once I had gotten myself onto that track. Excuse me. Got that interruption? My son called me. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing we did last time with our cat brush here, just to blend it all in. Alright. Okay, here we have it. One very pretty blended bat. I have us all set up here for showing you that technique I was talking about. Now this is our bat, and as you can see there's still some strong streaks of white and green, but that's okay. That'll provide variety and interest. Now all I'm doing here is I'm rolling it up, and then I'm going to be very careful. This does require a good bit of force, and you want it to be nice and even force. I'm going to go back over it several times. So I'm just roughly stretching it. You don't want to pull too hard and separate it. You just want everybody to slide along, and instead of being a big fat donut, you want to be a nice skinny little tube. And so I'm getting part of the way down now, and then I'll start over and get it down thinner. If you try to go from really big to really thin right away, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of chunky pieces you now have to spin because they're going to pull apart. And you want nice, gentle, even pressure to slide the fibers along their stable lengths and pull And this also will blend it just a little bit more as you're going. See, I pulled just a little bit too hard there. But basically, at a mill, they have rows and rows of machines that will do a very similar to this process in making a roving after it's carded. And you get a very nice, even, thin, basically you get a pencil roving out of it, and then they combine those rovings back together to produce a fairly even, consistent, and straight roving that we're all used to. I find that after having done several of these, my shoulder is not entirely happy with me. I damaged my shoulder in a car accident years ago, and it doesn't like this smooth and consistent, even pressure. It's been giving me some grief for the last couple of months. Anyway, so got to the end. I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to do it again. You just want to, after that first one, it is a lot easier. Thin it out and pull it nice and straight. So now technically, because we did not do our fiber blending and processing on combs, the yarn, because I'm going to be spinning it worsted, will be a semi-worsted yarn. If you wanted a true worsted yarn, you would need to have done the blending on combs. And of course, traditionally, the difference between those two is the alignment of the fibers. Now, if you look here to your eyes, that looks pretty darn straight, but it's not entirely straight, and there are still quite a few jumbles in there, which is why it's semi and not fully. For the most part, it's not really that big of a deal. There are some advantages to one over the other. A worsted yarn, a true worsted yarn, tends to be stronger and flatter with less air inside. So while it is stronger, it is also traditionally less insulative. A woolen yarn tends to be softer and fuzzier. It contains more air in it, but it is also more likely to wear out on you because of the strength that's put in a woolen, or in a worsted rather, in aligning all of those fibers and spinning it tightly. The worsted has a little bit more strength in the yarn itself, which is not to say that you can't make a very strong woolen, and that all worsted is in fact stronger than all woolen. Just to say that traditionally and in general, that is the case. Now, this is going to be fairly strong no matter what I do because of that silk. Silk is in its own right a very strong fiber. It just occurred to me that I'm playing with a light green yarn over a light green mat. So I'm certain that when my father watches this video, he's going to give me the business. So we'll pull it out. And hopefully that small little change, although the table being white probably doesn't help a great deal either, and I can't change the color of the tabletop. So this might have helped you see it more clearly. It may have actually made it worse, but we're trying. All right. Oh, this is pretty good. And I could just stop here. But trying to blah, blah, blah. I am trying to spin a yarn that will ply against this in an even and balanced way. And this is a fairly slender little yarn. Let me just grab one. That was 3. Fairly slender little yarn here, which means I need to attenuate this further, which is easier to do now than to ball it up and do it again later. So back to the beginning. Now, in my earlier videos, one of the things that I did was just stick a camera above me as I worked. I tend to work with something going on in the background. TV or podcasts, that sort of thing. And I didn't worry too much about the ambient noise in my house because I was simply going to rip the audio off and speed up the film. I wanted to give a sense of the time that all of this takes. I think that one of the things that is lost in our modern world, because we don't all make everything that we use, is how much time and effort goes into all of the things that we use. For us, it may be an hour at the grocery store picking up the food, but it was, in many cases, a good chunk of the year to get that food to you. So I wanted to, in my video, even if it was just sped up, to give you a sense of that time. And so in the mystery spin video, I have several sections that are like 3 minutes long or so in the video, and my hands are going super, super fast. Well, that 3-minute section is actually sped up 6 times speed. And so a lot of the initial video segments that I taped were 20 to 45 minutes long, sometimes longer than that even. And after I'm done clipping out things and speeding it up, it becomes about 3 minutes to you. But even those 3 minutes, when you combine, all the steps and each one gets a 1 to 6 minute video, it does kind of, I think, represent to some degree the length of time that it takes to do all of this. Now, I'm not showing that to you to cause you to be less interested in doing it. I am attempting to cause you to appreciate the time that goes into it, that it's not just talent or skill, but it is a real investment of time and labor and effort. So that is the purpose behind why I've been doing the videos like that. I did also find that it's very, very difficult for me to take the audio track off of a video shot on the camera that I'm using. So that's why in part I'm just talking through this with no background noise. So this is basically what I'm going to continue to do. And when it is all done, I will have a ball like this. Actually, it's a little bit bigger than this. I broke this one. So the plan from here on out is that I am going to take 2 bats and spin up a bobbin, and take the other 2 bats and spin up a bobbin. And then I'm going to take 1 bobbin of this kind and 1 bobbin of the new kind, and I will ply them together. And hopefully that will produce 2 skeins or so of really shiny, shimmery spring green yarn that I will call Wild of Nothing. All right, we are on to the playing. I have already started. Actually, I've shot this video about 6 times now. I'm hoping that the light outside will help you to be able to see, help the camera to be able to focus. That does mean it's going to be noisier than I would like. There are birds in the trees and cars going by. So what we're trying to do here is put an even amount of twist into the whole yarn. And I find the easiest way to do that is to watch the twist angle here. I'm hoping that that is focusing in on for you. So you want to keep the same twist angle throughout your entire yarn. I'm shooting for a 45-degree angle here because I expect that it's going to be knitted when it's done. One of the things you want to keep in mind is to not put too much twist in. You don't want overspun yarn. If it's overspun, it's going to hang all crinkly. When you pull it off, it's going to shrink back up on itself, and it won't be particularly fun to knit with or to crochet with or to weave with. And the finished object is going to have some very strange warping. Even if you block the yarn, that twist energy is still within the yarn. It's just being forced to hold itself in a different position. So you can knit with an over twisted garment, a yarn, and then block it out just exactly the way you want. And then the first time you wash it, it's going to do all sorts of weird things for you. So you want to be conscious. We're going to try that again. So you want to be conscious of how much twist you're putting into the yarn and the angle at which the yarn is, the 2 strands are holding each other at when they go into your orifice. They will get a little bit more as they go past the orifice, past the hooks, and onto the bobbin, but they won't get a great deal more. And if you're working at a steady, even pace, they'll get the same amount more, or they'll get close to the same amount more. We are not mills in China, or anywhere else for that matter. We are not producing big mill yarn. We're producing hand spun. And so there's always going to be a little bit of variation. And that variation is interesting, and that extra bits of texture is interesting, and it's one of the great qualities of handmade yarn. In addition to knowing exactly where your yarn came from and that it was made and sourced ethically, the fact that it is in and of itself pretty and unique throughout the entire strand is, I think, one of the reasons to use hand spin. So we're just going to continue going like this, back and forth, over and over again. This is one of those activities I generally do while watching the TV. There's a car going by. But you want to pick... He was bigger than I thought, sorry. You want to pick a yarn, or a TV program rather, that is kind of calm. I tend to find that in the more suspenseful sections or the action scenes, I go faster. So primarily I like to watch documentaries while doing this, simply because in general in a documentary there's not going to be a suspenseful bit or an action scene to make me go faster, or that sort of idea there. One of the things you want to make sure that you're doing, or not doing maybe is a better way to do it, or say it, while you're doing this, is you want to keep your hand kind of straight, your back hand, and it doesn't matter which hand is in front and which hand is in back. Both hands are working, both hands are doing a job. Crafting and drawing wise, I am ambidextrous, so I could just switch hands. I'm not going to do that right now. I tend to find it more comfortable to use my right hand in the back. But it doesn't matter. If you're more comfortable with your left hand in the back, use your left hand in the back. Well, one of the things you want to do, and this is for the aid and the comfort of the hand that's in the back, is don't let the yarn go into the natural cracks and corners in your hand. So keep it out of the joint. If you let it stay there, and it does want to go there, that is the natural tendency spot for it to go, you're going to end up with, and see I'm doing it, these places where your hand from the friction starts to get shiny and cut. It's not cut yet, but it is very quickly done and really uncomfortable. And spinning with band-aids on is no fun, neither is blood in your yarn. So you want to keep your hand kind of loose and relaxed, because you don't want to cause any extra stress on your hand, but you also want to make certain that you're keeping it fairly straight and you're keeping an eye on where the yarn is hitting your hand so that it's not in the natural corners, into the wrinkly bits in your hand, and it's also not going across the same spot for the entire plying. This skein will be longer, or at least what's on the bobbins is longer than when I did the first skeins, the first skein here. And that's, I haven't counted it yet, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be about 600 yards, which means that I spent a lot of time with this yarn rubbing against my hand. Now, if you just touch it, it's soft, but if you're pulling it across your hand and your hand is absorbing all of that friction, it can get not soft very quickly. We don't want you to get injured, so it's just one more thing you have to pay attention to. I also like not having the two strands across the same finger. I find keeping them separated helps the look of my ply. I don't do it for the entire time, but I find this hand position to be more comfortable and produce a nicer yarn than if I were to have both of them going like this, say, where all of my fingers are under both strands of the yarn. And one of the ways you can do this is to count while you're plying. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is a really good way to get into the rhythm, but over the course of an entire skein of yarn, it's kind of tedious. I have a friend who sings the whole time she's doing it. Her song matches the cadence that she's going at so that she can keep herself in step. I am not going to subject you to my singing voice. So, however you work best, if it's having music in the background, if it's having a TV show in the background, if it's counting or singing, you want to make sure that you're doing the same thing at the same speed over and over again to produce a nice, evenly twisted, balanced yarn. And don't beat yourself up if it's not entirely perfect the entire way, because it won't be. Alright, so I am going to turn off the camera now and finish this up inside the house where the breeze isn't blowing and I don't have to listen to the cars. And then I will get back to you for the next step in the process of making this skein of yarn.
Here is what all of our work has accomplished. Approximately 1,022 yards of yarn in 3 skeins. The wraps per inch works out to be 15, making this yarn sport weight, aka 2 or fine, which depends on the system you are more comfortable with. The overall weight of the skeins is 11.2 ounces. The individual skeins are 498 yards in 5.2 ounces. 416 yards in 4.75 ounces, and 108 yards in 1.25 ounces. I suspect that this is caused by my initial splitting of the green wool. I originally thought that I would spin the brown sheep wool alone, but after spinning for a while, I wanted the finished yarn to have some shine, which led me to the plan that we've discussed earlier in this video. I don't mind when the plan changes. The old one may have been beautiful, the new one certainly is. I love how this yarn turned out. It is soft, lustrous, and has a pretty variation on a theme of spring greens. Spring green equals Shakespeare in my head, and so here is the quote for you that led me to the name of this yarn, Wild of Nothing. Madam, you have bereft me of all words. Only my blood speaks to you in my veins. And there is such confusion in my powers, as after some oration fairly spoke by a beloved prince, there doth appear among the buzzing pleasèd multitude, where every something, being blent together, turns to a wild of nothing, save of joy, expressed and not expressed. But when this ring parts from this finger, then parts life from hence. O then be bold to say, Bassanio's dead. From The Merchant of Venice, Act 3, Scene 2. I hope you enjoyed this video. I want to thank my returning viewers for their support and to welcome new viewers. I know that there are lots of videos out there and our days only get more busy. Thank you for letting me be part of your day.
Okay, outside take like 37.